Hello, good afternoon. We paused a few minutes because of the lovely weather in case there were folks that were attempting to come, but thank you for those of us here in our live audience for joining us. And we have a growing number of people on the virtual option because isn't that great that we have that option? So welcome to the IUPUI Center for Translating Research into Practice annual campus keynote address here today at the Herron School of Art Auditorium. My name is Steve Vieweg, and I'm the Associate Director of the Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's keynote with our esteemed guest, Dr. Mark Becker. And as I said, we welcome our live audience here, and we also welcome our virtual audience. So the Center for Translating Research into Practice is the brainchild of Emeritus Professor Sandra Petronio here today, a translational scholar in privacy management of information. And when she and her husband, Emeritus Chancellor Charles Bance, first came to campus back in 2003, they noticed that much of the research on our urban campus is what we would call translational. It's research that crosses disciplines and generates knowledge in partnership with the community to solve complex problems. It includes students in building a love for discovery. Our center identifies, promotes, and encourages this kind of research activity. We celebrate translational research in a variety of ways, including this annual keynote address, as well as a showcase in the fall. We host a Scholar of the Month series with community conversations and produce a newsletter full of useful information and ideas. Our awards program support a faculty fellow and a scholar each year to deepen their community engaged projects with amazing results. We also have a partnership with the IUPUI Library's ScholarWorks service, which makes academic journal articles easily accessible to all of us in the community. You can find links to the various articles by our translational scholars and lots of other information on our website at trip.iupui.edu. And we hope that you'll follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you'll check out our YouTube channel. In short, please engage with us and learn more. These kinds of events are only possible with the support from lots of campus partners, and we thank you all for your contributions to today's program. That includes the Office of Community Engagement, the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research, the President's Office, the Chancellor's Office, everybody that plays along, the library, et cetera. So thank you for your support. We are especially grateful to the John H. Bonner Community Center for hosting our community keynote last night in their beautiful space. The Bonner Center is involved in a number of amazing projects here or there on the near east side of Indianapolis, and we appreciate those close partnerships that we share with the staff and the community associated with the Bonner Center in their important work. We want to also thank our outstanding students who are helping us with many details today. You might have met them out there. Anna Comer is a communication studies student, and John Salata is a student in computer science. So let's give them a big thank you. They're out in the hallway, so clap loud so they can hear you. And offer your best wishes and encouragement as they work on completing their studies and entering the workforce. Coming up later this month, I'm excited to share our next Scholar of the Month conversation will be on Friday, March 24th at 12 noon on Zoom, featuring Anila Tiemant, who will lead a conversation on reframing teacher learning as a mirrored process of becoming. And I can't leave out an invitation for you to support our translational scholarship and hope that you'll tune in on April 19th, because guess what that is? It's the annual IU Day festivities. So check out iuday.iu.edu and think about supporting IU in any way, but think about translational research if you don't mind. But speaking of possibilities, it's my pleasure to welcome our interim chancellor, Andy Klein, to the podium to share his words of welcome to our campus. So please welcome Chancellor Klein.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for the energy and commitment you bring to the center. Really, thank you, Steve, for the energy and commitment you bring to everything you do. We appreciate you here on campus. So it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon as we celebrate translational research on the IUPUI campus. And there goes Chancellor Bance's phone. It's the right moment. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to today's event, and a special welcome to Sandra Petronio, Chancellor Bantz, who I will introduce in just a moment, and our guest speaker, Mark Becker. We thank you for being here. How about a round of applause for our special guest as well? One of the images that I think people often connect with universities is the ivory tower, right? People imagine university professors as disconnected from the real world with scholarly interests that have little to do with the community or everyday problems. Well, I'm proud to say that here at IUPUI, we don't really embrace that ivory tower. We build bridges between our research and the world around us. And one of those bridges is translational research. This kind of research, taking discoveries from bench to bedside, from classroom to community, that's really part of our DNA here at IUPUI. And it changes people's lives. I'm looking at Dean Halverson over there. The pandemic, right, provided just some really terrific and powerful lessons about the importance of translational research. Our teams across IUPUI work to develop diagnostic tools. We designed the state's coronavirus data hub. We launched the first statewide prevalence study in the whole nation. We expanded contact tracing for the city of Indianapolis. That's just one, but a powerful example of what translational research can do. The IUPUI Center for Translating Research into Practice helps create an environment where this kind of research can thrive. Events like today's TRIP Keynote Campus program shine a spotlight on that space. Now, as many of you in this room and watching virtually know, the Center for Translating Research into Practice was started by former Chancellor Bantz and Dr. Sandra Petronio. Dr. Petronio brings tremendous expertise in translating research into practice, which is at the core of her scholarship on different forms of communication. So drawing on that experience, she's the one who spearheaded the TRIP initiative. It's now my great pleasure to welcome to the podium Dr. Bantz, who served as IUPUI's fourth chancellor and who made a transformational difference in the life of our campus. In so many ways, Chancellor Bantz helped advance IUPUI's commitment to the community as he grew research funding, increased enrollment, earned IUPUI a place on the President's Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll for our campus's commitment to community service. We are immensely grateful, Charles, for all that you've done for this campus and all that you continue to do. Will you please join me in welcoming to the podium, Charles Bantz.
It'd be easy to say that it's so nice to be back here and hear so many nice things about the campus and about the people. And it's nice to feel some of that love myself, but I'm especially glad to hear Sandra recognized for her genius in cooking this up. It has been amazing the number of ideas over these years that have finally come to fruition. And all of you who've been on Zoom with us know that the pandemic made us take something that we had as an idea, Sandra had as an idea, and kept pushing. We have to have a way for people to connect on campus. It's hard in an urban campus to do that. We need a way to make this happen. And guess what? Every month, we now have a Scholar of the Month that people are coming together. And the last two Scholar of the Month events had well over 130 people participating on the Zoom. And this is an idea that we wanted to see, but we didn't have the resources or the cleverness to figure out how to get 130 people regularly to come to something on a campus. And Zoom and the pandemic made it happen. And so it's been fun to be participating in those Scholars of the Month, but we're in Chicago and we're able to see it from there. So thank you, the scholars who've done that, but thank you for all of you who keep participating and supporting this work. Every year, it's such a fun thing to try and think of who could we invite. Last year, we had an easy idea. We thought we'd invite the brand new president of Indiana University who built her career on telemedicine. And she spoke on this stage from, as she said, it was a great flashback. She hadn't given one of these lectures in about 15 years, where she was laying out her career and what she'd done. And that was a good opportunity. We've found people from all over the country and the world who have come to this. And this year we had the opportunity, I thought it was exactly the right time to take someone who has the technical expertise in statistics, to know data really, really well. He happens to be timely in that specialty because he did public health and was a dean of public health at one of the great original schools of public health, which happened to be at one of my alma maters at Minnesota. And he had been a university administrator between that deanship, provost, and then the president of what is clearly known nationally is a successful place to try and improve student success. Georgia State gave us the push to keep pushing ourselves here, because Mark and his team, as he'll talk about, would constantly be coming up with something new that we needed to think about or think about again. In a couple of cases, we tried something and it didn't seem to work, but what if we added this to it? And that kind of leadership is a great illustration of where someone builds a team who can make this happen. And it is certainly timely, given the university's commitment to student success. It's timely given our need post-pandemic to make sure that more people come to college, not fewer, and that they succeed even more than they have improved in the last decade. We've got to do this for our future. That's just simply the case. So to have someone who for 12 years led an urban campus, he had the joyous experience of being almost doubled in size by having a community college merged into his. So he ended up with over 50,000 students. And stop and think what that did to the dynamic of the need for student success in the first 2 years when you gain a community college suddenly. So he had that experience. And he's had a whole series of expertise over the years, building teams and cleverly finding a way to get it done in an environment sometimes that was not as supportive as one might have hoped. How's that? That's why administrators survive sometimes. That's the polite statement. But Mark is here today, and I'm going to say this. He'll say it's not a problem, but his voice is under pressure. He tells me last night it doesn't hurt. So don't feel like that. But I want you to know you will see the passion that is animated the work that was done. And I want you to please welcome Mark Becker, who, by the way, has a new job, and he's now president of the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, 250 of the major research universities in this country. And oh, by the way, he gets the opportunity to work for a board of presidents and work for the dues paid by 250 presidents. Please welcome a very clever person.
Thank you. It's terrific to be here. And as Charles said, I feel a lot better than I sound. But can you hear me okay all the way in the back? Okay. Well, it's wonderful to be here. And I am indeed very passionate about what I'll talk about. And I have to say that the most rewarding part of the work that I've been able to be part of, because it's a team effort, is that student success is a national agenda now. It's not just a few institutions. So the title I gave for this talk, not knowing that I'd be speaking in the School of Design, is Success by Design. So I want to tell the story of how at Georgia State, we literally redesigned how students experience the university in the interest of them achieving their success. I'll also say that before I start, not only is the design theme consistent, but also the translational research. I will try to remember to point out as I go through this. In our work, we did something very unusual for a university. We actually practiced what we teach, which is called the scientific method. Normal method in higher ed when you've got a problem is to put a bunch of PhDs around the table and they discuss, debate, and then they find the answer and they're done. Problem is they never evaluate whether or not they were right. And our approach, as I will try to emphasize, is to actually see whether or not what we do works and be able to scale it. So to sort of set the story for this, if you go back 15 to 20 years, well before Georgia State has a student success agenda, it was not a good situation in Atlanta at Georgia State University. There were 20-some thousand students. The graduation rate, first-time full-time graduation rate for undergraduates on average was in the low 30%. And there were significant disparities for students of color. The graduation rates are in the 20%. Absolutely unacceptable. On top of that, at that point, the university was exclusively a commuter campus and very, very heavy transfer in, transfer out. So the beginning of the story of the change starts with a provost, Ron Henry, that worked for my predecessor. And Ron knew that the numbers that Georgia State had, that the outcomes for the students were just unacceptable, beyond embarrassing, but shameful. So he set on the effort to start trying to borrow from other universities, because in higher ed, we're constantly stealing from each other. There's no shame in stealing good ideas. And his key decision after deciding to go down this road was to hire the man who became my colleague and the real leader of this work, Dr. Timothy Rennick. Tim was hired in July of 2008. At that point, Tim had been the chair of the Department of Religious Studies. He has a PhD in religion from religious studies from Princeton University, and had spent his entire life as a faculty member and a department chair. But what drew him to this work was his commitment to and his passion for students. Throughout his life, he's always been student-centered. So when Tim is 6 months into the job, I show up, and I don't have a PhD in religious studies. Charles said statistics. You're going to find out Tim's a better statistician than I am. So January 2009, when Tim and I become colleagues, and the rest of our colleagues at Georgia State, the institution's approximately 28,000 students. It's a majority minority population with double-digit percentages of every major identifiable group within the Georgia population. So 40% African-American, 30% white, 15% Asian American, 10% Hispanic, and another 5% of the students who self-identified as mixed race. On top of that, 60% of the students are on Pell. So 60% of the undergraduate students by qualifying for federal Pell grants, low-income backgrounds. The institution is very high transfer. In 2009, fall of 2009, was the last year in which the number of transfer students in exceeded the number of incoming freshmen out of high school. This becomes all part of a change story. 2010, we do what new presidents do, or supposed to do, strategic planning. And I'll say right up front, I was a naysayer about strategic planning. In all honesty, I tried not to do a strategic plan. I actually told the leadership team that I inherited, I didn't want to do one because every university I'd ever been at had a strategic plan and it sat on a shelf and we never did anything in the plan. So I figured, why waste our time? And my colleagues were extraordinarily polite. He said, that's good. And then one day, one of them had the temerity to say, you do know our accrediting body requires a strategic plan. And if you don't do one, we're going to have problem getting reaccredited in a few years. So the provost, who Tim was working at that point, Tim was an associate provost. Provost and I basically had a conversation. I said, well, if we're going to do this, we're actually really going to do it. Okay, we're not going to just go through a process. All previous Georgia State strategic plans, as far as anybody could remember, had been written by the provost in 2 weeks, presented to the faculty, and became what were known as Christmas trees. Every department had an ornament on the tree. Almost nobody got a present under the tree. So as we started strategic planning, I didn't know that student success, we didn't even use the term student success, was going to be in the plan. But I did know that Georgia State, like IUPUI, was an urban institution with a fascinating student body and a faculty and staff committed to that mission, being relevant to its community and being transformation on the lives of its students. Personally, I didn't do a lot in the strategic plan. I launched it, did some framing, did a couple of checks, but the key was the launch. I set some very basic parameters. There would be no more than 5 goals, which I knew meant there'd be 5 because universities usually want 20. So there would be no more than 5. It had to fit on a single sheet of paper. It had to be written in English that didn't require a PhD in any discipline. And that needed to be an understanding in the planning process that we were not going to participate in what I referred to as Einstein's definition of insanity, which is to keep on doing what you've always done and expect the results to change. So I telegraphed from the launch that once we had this plan, there would be change. We weren't going to just keep doing it. And this plan was going to help lay the foundation for what that change would be. At the end of it, when the work was done, this was all against my behavior of being impatient. This process took 11 months. We did white papers, open forums, lots of discussions. So there was 1 semester of total input, surveys, faculty, staff, students, everything. Committee wrote over the summer and then finalized in the fall. And we took a vote in January. We had launched in February, the year before. When we got to the penultimate draft, we had 5 goals. They were written in academic jargon, not in plain English. And fortunately, the facilitator, who was a marketing professor from our business school, had come up with a brilliant idea, was that we would field test this plan with external stakeholders. So we had 24 interviews, all done by an alumni-owned firm, pro bono, to basically get feedback from the external community. This was elected officials, civic leaders, major donors. And they were, you couldn't have asked for better feedback because it was really succinct. The feedback came down to 1 sentence because the 24 were unanimous. Sounds impressive. I don't know what it means, and I don't know why I should care. And the Strategic Planning Committee looked at me in October of 2010. And one of the individuals who I eventually appointed as dean said, "Does this mean we start over?" I said, "No. What this means is we need to write this in a way that we can actually have it understood by everybody. Because we're going to go into a capital campaign. This is going to be a foundation. I am going to go to the state capitol every year as I did that year and ask for money. That's part of my job. I need to have something that other people understand, not that we understand. Everybody understands." So I volunteered and they willingly accepted. I rewrote the goals in language that I thought the greater community would understand. I also pulled a sleight of hand. The draft they gave me had what became known as student success as goal number 3. And when I looked at it and I looked at their ambition for what we could do, because what they were saying is they wanted to actually move the needle in a way that would be something that others across the country could benefit from and perhaps emulate, that I knew that if we went for this boldly, we could actually do something really transformational for our students, for our community, and for the country. So without asking permission, I moved it to number 1. Nobody ever asked me about it. And we went from there. I've never said it was the most important. I've always said it was the first. Because all the goals, all the priorities are important. The other point I want to make, as I said, now that student success is in the conversation. We also knew at the point that the time was right. Our governor red state, blue city, our governor had signed on to complete college America. He knew that the state of Georgia, to be economic and competitive, needed more college graduates. The Metro Atlanta workforce, which is 60% of the state of Georgia, needed more college graduates. So we had alignment with the governor's office. And that's important because he proposes the budget and he has line item veto. So it was important to get that support. Also, the Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia, a few months after we do our strategic plan, writes theirs. And they have the same goal that we have, which is to basically greatly increase graduation rates for all demographics. So we were off and running. Just to summarize before I get into some of our approach to doing that, today, as Charles said, it's more than 50,000 students. 17,000 of those came from a merger, a consolidation with a 5-campus community college, and the rest from growth in the student body. The graduation rates, as I said, had once been in 30s, even 20s for some groups. Today, the graduation rate for first time, full time at Georgia State's approaching 60%, nearly 60%, which is above the national average. But more importantly, what we learned, because we are a high transfer institution, that we needed to be able to track our students for what happened to all of them. So we actually know that of the students who started with us, almost exactly 80% of them graduate from college within 6 years, which is well above the national average in general and blows it out of the water for a diverse student body in the 60% Pell population. So we're incredibly proud of that. What we're most proud of is we eliminated all disparities in graduation rates based on race, ethnicity, or income. So that was, it had not been done at a campus of our size prior to that. I am pleased to say that others are getting those results today. So the approach in one sentence is evidence-based change at scale. That's probably not a proper sentence. I wasn't a good English student, but as a phrase, or we'll put it as a phrase, evidence-based change at scale. So what I want to do is give you a few examples and then be happy to go to Q&A because I've got more examples than there is time and I don't want to bore you with all of them. But I'll start off with that practice with what we preach. This was not one of the huge movers, but it was the beginning of our process of using institutional data and actually doing randomized controlled experiments of what we were doing to see whether or not the change that we were implementing worked. And it's a very simple one. The phrase is beautiful. It's a program that we call Keep Hope Alive. Hope is a scholarship in the state of Georgia under Governor Zell Miller back in, I believe, it was the 80s and 90s. They instituted a state lottery. They committed they would take part of the money to give students scholarships to go to college in Georgia. It also transformed higher education in Georgia because it kept a lot of students in state who had historically left. The beauty of Hope is if you basically graduate high school with a 3.0 GPA, you're going to get a Hope scholarship. You can get larger amounts if your GPA is much, much higher. But the overwhelming majority of Georgia State students come in with the Hope scholarship. Add that 60% Pell, you can see how very low income students between a Hope scholarship and a Pell grant can afford to attend an institution with a tuition that's roughly $10,000 a year. The problem, or not the problem, the challenge for students is they have to keep that 3.0 GPA through college to keep the scholarship. If their GPA goes below 3.0, they lose the Hope scholarship. You can get it back. There's checks, I think, either every 30 credit hours. So it's checked at 30. If you went below 3.0, you don't get it, but you can get it back at 60. So the question was, could we come up with a program to help these students stay in school and re-earn their Hope scholarships and thereby keep Hope alive? We didn't have the money to be able to replace the scholarship. We put in some money. The basic model is very simple. There is a skills program. These students are good high school students. Clearly, the transition to college was perhaps more difficult than they might have anticipated. And so there's a skills program, note taking, keeping up with class, test preparation, quiz preparation, basic academic skills that kids coming out of highly resourced high school have been taught as part of their experience. Or some of our students were not fortunate enough to come out of high schools where that was the norm. Second is academic coaching. They had an academic coach, somebody to meet with, just to keep them on track. You know, where are you? What are you doing? Et cetera. And then the third part, $500, not the 7,000 that a Hope Scholarship would have been, or 6,000, but something to keep them in the game. And then we took a group of students, picked them in a match control group, did the study, and the students raised their GPAs in this control group, and it actually worked. So it became a program that we've continued to implement to this day. But that was our first example of, I say, practice what we preach. And the reason I say practice what we preach, your campus, every campus, teaches the scientific method to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of freshmen every fall in introduction to biology or chemistry or physics. If you think you got a problem to solve, you come up with a hypothesis, you formulate a way to evaluate what the hypothesis, you do the study, you see if it works. That's not what we tend to do in higher ed when we lead change. But we tend to tell students that's what they're supposed to do when they go out into the world. Okay, so that's example number one. Example number two, I'm going to go to that scale word. You know, the challenge we had with 28,000 students at the beginning, as it grew over 30,000 towards 50 and above, was we did not have the resources to be able just to hire a lot more people to spend more time with students. That wasn't within our reality. So Tim and his team started looking around for tools. At that point, the company EAB was fairly early in the game of building data analytics tools. So EAB worked with us. And what we were looking for was alerts of signs that students are getting off track. And EAB came in, we gave them access to all of our data. And this is primarily academically off track. They're academically at risk. Even though there are financial and other things that put you at risk. At Georgia State at that time, students was 7 times more likely to drop out for financial reasons than academic. So we were tracking lots of things. EAB built a system that identified 800 different variables and the indicator that a student's getting off track. That system has continued to be refined, is still used to this day. So every night in the middle of the night, the data set is updated with whatever's changed during the day. System runs a check on every undergraduate student. And if anything in the data set indicates the student's getting off track, student and their undergraduate advisor get an email, and they are required to meet within a certain number of days to talk about what's going on. You know, is this something that is really putting you at risk? Do you require, is it necessary for you to do something different? You know, just what's going on there. And that system has been extraordinarily helpful. The next one, also at scale, I want to talk about is back to the evidence-based change. And this was by far the most controversial change we made. Controversial on our campus, more controversial for other campuses who've tried to emulate us. Again, Tim's a better statistician than I am. I've stopped looking at data when I stopped being a professor. Now I look at budgets. Budgets are not the same as data. They have numbers, but they're not the same. But Tim, he and his team started going through the data. They saw lots of evidence that students were making decisions that were not in their best interests. Two of the, one of the most egregious examples is a student in the end of their junior year, beginning of their senior year, deciding to change majors. And we're not necessarily talking dramatic, sociology to psychology or vice versa. Some, changes in near majors. Nobody told the students explicitly at a conversation with them previously. You do know the requirements for graduation are different, and you just obligated yourself to 1, 2, 3 more semesters. Think about the time, the fact that hope runs out after 4 years. Pell runs out after 4 years. Your financial aid is not going to be available for help in terms of those types of awards, but students were doing these sorts of things. Another example we discovered in the data set was we had a policy in the business school that required for students in the upper division, juniors and seniors, to maintain a GPA above 3.0 in a certain set of courses. Students would get into the business school, get a C, it'd drop below. They'd go out, go find some courses they could get some A's in, get back above 3, go in. We were seeing shifting, jumping. You could actually see in the data students jumping back and forth. I refer to it as a hydraulic. If it was in a river where the water just circulates in place, we were circulating students. Long story short, degrees of 120 credit hours were taking more than 5 years to complete, and students were graduating on average with at least 10 more credit hours than they needed. The other simple example was students signing up for courses that did not count towards their degrees. Nobody ever asked the question. So when they started looking at advising and how we could change advising at scale so that all the students would get good at advising, we realized we couldn't do that the way we had always done things. Einstein's definition of insanity, because advising was done at the department level. And every department had its own approach. Every department had different expectations of who was advising and what they were supposed to do. So this was by far the biggest change that required, if you will, the power of the president. Was we centralized advising. Now we took the advisors from the colleges, put them into 2 floors of a high-rise building, gave them professional training in advising, gave them with an abundance of technology tools. So when they sit with the student, they can basically talk about anything. They can talk about, if a student wants to talk about, should I major in this or that? They actually have real-time data for the jobs, the job titles, the job salaries that go with those degrees. If they're talking about having trouble in math, they have information on there about where the student's math background is, et cetera. So it covers a lot of territory. The other beauty of it is that the system, because all the students are in there and every advisor has a set of students they're assigned, we also have the data on the advisors. So we also know whether or not the advisors are doing good advising, because we can track how their students are doing. And the reality is we had to let one advisor go. So it's not disastrous, but somebody's students just were not keeping track with the others. The other piece I'll add here, because I talked about alignment. Question I usually get when I talk about that example is, well, did you have to hire more advisors? And where did you find the money? And the answer is we did have to hire, I think it was 30 more advisors. But we had to hire 30 more advisors because we were not at the national average for the number of students per advisor. National average, I think, if I remember correctly, was about 300 to 1. And we were higher than that. And where I got the money is go back to the alignment. The Board of Regents in their budget request said, what do you need? We said, we need more money for more advisors. They had in their strategic plan that they wanted to increase graduation. We had it in ours. They gave me the money, and the money had come from the governor and the state. So it was the importance of alignment. So that's another example. I'll do just a few more here, and then I'm happy to go to Q&A. I'll call this patterns and problems, because really, I talked about the scientific method. Good scientists are always observing and start to notice things, and things show up in the data. Well, a problem that we had year in and year out, particularly at the beginning of the fall semester, is students we expected to be back did not show up. These are students with 3.0, 3.5, 3.8 GPAs. Why aren't they back? Now, the provost team, and by this time, Tim's vice president, but the provost senior VP, they're working together. They spent a lot of time talking about how to solve this problem. And then finally, the provost had a stroke of genius. She looked at him and said, why don't we ask them why they're not coming back? So they did. So, I don't want you to think everything is high tech. Literally called up the students. Why aren't you coming back? And this becomes the genesis of what become known as Panther retention grants, the whole concept of retention grants. In Georgia, you cannot sign up and enroll in classes unless you pay your tuition in full for the semester. And the answer if I'm not coming back is, well, my car broke down and I had to have something done. I'm $200 short, or I had to get new tires, or whatever it be, or I had to help my parents. And so this was not that students were $7,000, $5,000 short. It was typically a few hundred. And then the idea was, okay, well, can we do something about it? So we took a small amount of money that made through a capital campaign gift to the university. And I directed Tim to use that money to try and experiment with something where he didn't have the money, but he had an idea of something that would work. So they took the money and started doing these Panther retention grants. The beauty of them is that what was different about what we did and anything that had been done previously, the student didn't have to know about it and they didn't have to apply for it. We went into the data set, found who needs to be back. And if they get a little bit of money, they're likely to stay on track and graduate. In other words, if their GPA had dropped to 1.5, they're probably not getting, they're definitely not getting a Panther retention grant. But they're at 3.8 and we can give them $500 or $700 and keep them in school and they'll graduate in a few semesters, have at it. And so that's what we did. It worked. It's been evaluated. It works. This is a topic. It hasn't worked everywhere. And so it does have to be customized to your local institution. But it worked in our case. The last one I'll mention, just because of ChatGPT, is the coming of the bots. We moved into the world of intelligent texting chatbots. It's probably been 6-7 years ago now. Our VP for admissions was at an admissions conference and saw a company, it was a startup, didn't have any clients yet. They had an app they were trying to sell that would work on cell phones. And basically it would text back and forth with students to help them figure out which college they should go to. And our person was asked, would that be helpful to your students? His answer was no, but here's what I do need. Students I do admit aren't showing up. In higher ed, we call this summer melt. So it's a different melt than the other melt I talked about. They've been admitted, they may have paid a deposit, they may have come to orientation. There's a lot of reasons they don't show up. They didn't complete their federal financial aid form, so they didn't get their Pell Grant. They didn't complete all the vaccine requirements that the state of Georgia had, whatever it may be. So he described this problem to the tech entrepreneur who went back to his company. He had no clients, no customers, pivoted, came back to us with a proposal for a bot. And we signed a contract 2 weeks before they ran out of cash and went and would have been hard pressed to stay in business. They now have, I'm certain, at least hundreds of clients around the country. And that was just the beginning of our entree to bots. But in the first year, we reduced summer help by over 30% the first year using the bot. The bot answered over 80% of the questions. The other 18% or so had to go to a human. But the ones the bot answered were answered in 8 seconds. Didn't require anybody to be in the office. Students are vampires. Could have been 11 p.m., 1 a.m. The bot answered. The students know Pounce is a bot. They relate to Pounce differently than they relate to their human colleagues and supporters at Georgia State. And I'll just say this. I actually had coffee with the founder of that company a year ago. And I told him the story of how Pounce prevented a suicide. And when I got done telling him the story, he said, that's about the 6th or 7th time I've heard that. Student reached out to Pounce. Again, the student knows that Pounce is not judgmental. And the individual had texted Pounce and basically shared with Pounce that they were considering ending their life. Pounce knew enough to get that to a human who got that student the help they needed, and the suicide was prevented. So what we found is, even though we started with summer melt, the bots have been useful and helpful to students in so many ways, above and beyond just getting them to class. So I think I'll wrap it up there and just say that other key to accountability. Every week I met with my leadership team as long as I was in town, every week I would ask Tim Rennick, how are we doing this week? Where are we, where are we in graduation rates? Where are we in enrollment? What's happening? So, we just had accountability built in every month, and well predates my arrival at Georgia State. There's a university leadership meeting. It's the faculty senate executive committee. It's the president of the staff council, or chair of the staff council, president of student government, all the deans, all the VPs, and many of the associate VPs. And Tim would give a report every month. And it was always something new or different. This wasn't, we're going to update you from what we said last month. So it'd be about, here's what we're looking at that's different. Here's where we are in the cycle. Here's what we're concerned about. Because it was an all-in commitment of the university to this work. So I think that was critical. And then the other part is all the time is just, we were accountable. Today, Charles alluded to it, our work, we've got more press than anybody could have ever imagined for what we were doing in this work in terms of articles, books, etc. But it wasn't always that way. 5 or 6 years into this work, before, as we were starting to get the press, Tim, the provost, and myself, 3 separate occasions in meetings were accused of being liars or cheaters. That the results that we were claiming in terms of increasing graduation rates, eliminating equity gaps, were not achievable because nobody had done it yet. And that the only way that you couldn't do it, because everybody had tried in some way, shape, or form. And we had to be fudging the data. So our breakthrough came in 2016 when I was asked to be one of the founding institutions of the University Innovation Alliance, working with Michael Crow, and Purdue was part of it. This was, I don't know if Mitch was there at that point, but it's 12 institutions all around the country, geographically dispersed, but all large public research universities. And rule number 1 of the University Innovation Alliance was everybody's data was open to everybody else. There was not going to be any smoke and mirrors. There was not going to be any games. And the first meeting was in Atlanta, and they all came. They had access to anything they wanted. And that was when the naysayers went away, because we now had a group of people, university presidents and provosts, who actually had come and seen not only what we were doing, but that the data were real. This was not a manufactured outcome. So to summarize it, the question we ask ourselves at the end of the day is, was the reason the graduation rates were so low, was the reason that there were disparities, was the reason that we were the problem? And I ask that question rhetorically, because fundamentally what I want to say is the model of higher education today was not designed around our students. It was designed hundreds of years ago in a medieval period around a very elite, small subset of individuals. It was not designed for the current students in institutions like IUPUI and Georgia State. So we tried to redesign the institution so that it would be designed for our students, not for the historical model that we had inherited. Stop there and be happy to take Q&A. Thank you.